Good afternoon, all. Stephanie, are you ready to?
Yes.
Okay, let's, as soon as John comes on board, and there he is. Nice chest shot, John. And okay, I saw Sean earlier. Okay, we're all here. Are we ready to go, Stephanie?
Yes.
Okay, let's call this meeting to order. Madam City Clerk, could you do a roll call, please?
Yes. Councilmember Sawyer?
Here.
Vice Mayor Fleming?
Here.
Mayor Schwedhelm?
Here.
Let the records show that all subcommittee members are present.
Thank you so much for that. So a couple of housekeeping items. I'll remind my council members to keep their audio on mute unless you are speaking. Staff will remain muted until needing to speak. As members of the public join the meeting, you'll be participating as an attendee. Your microphone and camera will be muted. Only today's panelists will be viewed during the meeting. If you're calling in from a telephone and choose to speak during the public comment portion of today's agenda, for privacy concerns, the host will be renaming your viewable phone number to resident and the last 4 digits of your phone numbers. Madam City Clerk, could you explain how public comments will be heard at today's meeting?
Yes. As each agenda item is presented, the mayor will, after each agenda item is presented, the mayor will ask for comments and then open it up for public comment. The host in Zoom will be lowering all hands until public comment is open for the agenda item. Once the mayor has called for public comment, the mayor will announce for the public to raise their hand if they wish to speak on the specific agenda item. If you are calling in to listen to the meeting audibly, you can dial *9 to raise your hand. The host will then call on the public who have raised their hands. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes and a timer will appear on the screen for the council and the public to see. Once all live public comments have been heard, the meeting host will play any voicemail public comments. And if you provide a live public comment on the agenda, but also submitted an email comment, e-comment, or recorded voice message, your email, e-comment, or voice message public comment will not be duplicated, read, or played during the meeting. This meeting does have translators, so additionally, there is 1 public comment period on today's agenda to speak on non-agenda matters. This is the time when any person may address the council on matters not listed on the agenda. We do have a Spanish translation feature. Interpreters are participating in Zoom and will be translating the meeting on the Spanish channel. And during the public comment period, we'll step in to assist translation of public comment. And per the Brown Act, an additional 3 minutes will be added to the timer to accommodate for the translation.
Okay, thank you for that. For either of my fellow council members, do you have any announcements you wanted to make on item 2?
None from me, thank you.
And I'm seeing none from the Vice Mayor. Okay, on to item 3. We are now taking public comments on item 3, non-agenda matters. This is a time when any person may address the council on matters not listed on this agenda, but which are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. Madam Host, would you like to take it from here?
Thank you, Mayor. Giving a moment for public comments or the members of the public to raise their hands. Okay, there are no hands being raised on non-agenda items. Mayor, we did not receive any Voice message public comments, nor did we receive any email public comments for non-agenda matters.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on to item 4, new business. So the first item 4.1, is regarding the scope and mission. Amongst our subcommittee, we wanted to have a discussion of the scope and mission of the Public Safety Subcommittee. And I thought to start the conversation, I will just share what our early thoughts were regarding this and what I've shared publicly read at council meetings about the initial thoughts were. But obviously this is just a starting point. We can adjust it any way the three of us want to. So the original thoughts were the City Council's Public Safety Committee is charged with reviewing public safety issues, annual reports, and after-action reports for emergency services, fire, and police. Additionally, the Public Safety Subcommittee will review Santa Rosa's public safety policies and procedures and the independent police auditor function. So as a starting point, I'd like to hear from my colleagues what your thoughts are regarding the scope and mission of this subcommittee. Go ahead, Councilmember Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I think you captured it quite well, but at the same time, this is going to be a living document, as mentioned yesterday. And I think that it's going to be important, and I think probably we would all agree that things will, this will be an evolution, and things will come up that we need to discuss. There will be recommendations from the community, some of the things that we may have already considered, some I'm sure not. So it's going to be very important for the community to weigh in, because this has never been, in my experience as a lifelong resident of Santa Rosa, I don't believe that this exercise has ever been done, where we take a department like this, especially public safety, and really get down to the core of the responsibilities and look at things that can be changed, should be changed, and if nothing else, discussed. So I know that this will be, we will, maybe today, well, I'm sure that today we won't be able to flesh out everything that we will ultimately be responsible for, but I'm looking forward to that conversation. But I think that's a good start.
Great. Vice Mayor Fleming?
Yes, so I think that you've got some great details on the technical aspects of some of the things that we should address. My hope is that we could first, and if we can't do it first, that we could at least have it be a major part of our process, have a philosophical approach to what does it mean to be safe in our community. Because when I hear public safety, I don't automatically think of, cops and robbers or fires. I think about what does an ideal community that feels safe to the average person look like. And when I think about the death of Trayvon Martin or countless other people, they didn't die at the hands of police officers. They died because of complicity of community members, and sometimes with the complicity of the justice system. And so I'd be very interested in us having a robust dialogue about what does it mean for all of our citizens and residents to feel safe in our community, and what role does law enforcement and our fire department play within that? And I think that your suggestions, while they make sense, I think they in some way get out ahead of us having a discussion about what that means. And I don't mean any insult to your suggestions. I think that they all have a place within this subcommittee.
So the intent with some of the trying to keep it broad, but the first part is charged with reviewing public safety issues community-wide, or do you have any language you would like to offer to insert in here? Because I read that public safety issues, what I just heard you describe, later on in the agenda, our last item is actually future agenda items. And that question might be appropriate for future agendas. What does it mean to be safe in our community?
Okay, and to that end, I think that makes a lot of sense. And what I'd love to see is, like John said, this is a living document. This is a living and breathing thing that hopefully one of the things that we could continually do is come back to the idea of what does it mean to be safe in our community. Because there may be things that are not specifically living within the police department or the fire department or emergency services that are really important for us to do in order to ensure the safety of our residents.
And again, not wanting to wordsmith this, but I totally agree with what you're suggesting. And also having that conversation about what's the definition of safety? Because we typically can have a feeling of safety versus, what do we mean by feeling safe? So I think that all can be encompassed in the discussion.
Yeah. So to that end, if at some point, it could be, if it could be an ongoing thing, but also maybe in a future agenda when we get to that, an opportunity for the public to weigh in and let us know, where they feel safe and how they feel safe.
Okay, great. So John, do you have, you just got your hand down. Okay, so using that as a foundation, why don't we go to public comment here? Wait, John, do you have a question or no? You're mute now. You're mute.
I think it will be really important to move into that conversation, because safety definitely means different things to different people. And I know, and think about ladies that I know that at night, and they're working and they're parking, and safety to them could mean better lighting, which has nothing to do with our public safety department. It would be public works or some of the downtown organizations if it happens to be downtown. But lighting and that sense of that feeling, that sense of feeling safe could affect a number of our departments in addition to our public safety departments. So that having that conversation, I think, is really important so that we don't have things completely slip through the cracks.
Okay. Thank you for that. And what I heard last night with your economic development task force, where you had the 5 different buckets, because you're right, John, some of those things, let's say for lighting, okay, why don't we refer that item to transportation, public works, whoever would be the appropriate. So I think you guys on that task force are modeling, I think, a way that we could deal with some issues that may not be germane just to this committee. So, okay, so with that, get back on the script here. So we're now taking public comment on item 4.1, scope and mission of the subcommittee. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. You'll have 3 minutes. Madam City Clerk or Madam Host, could you take it from here?
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, Mayor, I do not see any hands. Well, there we go. One hand. The first public comment will be from Eric. Eric, I've enabled your speaking permissions. Can you please confirm you see the timer on your screen?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Please identify yourself for public record if you so choose, and your time begins now.
Thank you very much. This is Eric Frazier in Santa Rosa. Supporting Vice Mayor Fleming's statements about approaching your work in a broader way, I think is really spot on for a number of reasons. Number one, a lot of the issues that you're looking to confront are systemic. And so rather than just sort of scratching the surface, looking at things in a larger perspective definitely is warranted at this time. And of course, understanding the basis of what makes people safe certainly would be hand in hand with creating the metrics and the mission for anything related to public safety in the city. So since that needs to be readjusted, I think that's a fine place to start. And in fact, when it comes to safety and the nexus with justice, it really is the issue of how injustice is perpetrated on the citizens and visitors, on people. And, some of those areas come from subjective enforcement. Some of them come from faulty laws or regulations. Some of them come from the people that are doing the enforcement actions. But getting to the root of injustice really is the essence of preserving safety. In regards to enforcement activities, I think that you should also broaden your scope to understand the efficacy of enforcement activities when it comes to the shelter-in-place orders. I think there's a big sentiment in the community that those orders were enforced haphazardly and discriminately. Furthermore, I think it's really important to show the community that you're serious about this discussion. After all, you control the narrative, and by slanting the narrative, you will be perceived as being fair or being biased. And so hand in hand with controlling the narrative is preserving information, preserving, if you will, evidence of what's going on. So the public involvement is important, but it's really important that everybody is on the same page factually. And that's not something that the city, I don't think, is really used to perpetuating. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Eric. The next public comment will be from Manny, followed by Carla. Manny, I've enabled your speaking permissions. Can you please unmute yourself?
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Please identify yourself for public record, and you have 3 minutes.
First off, I really want to commend Vice Mayor Fleming for bringing up that question of what safety really means within the scope of the society. To me, I think it really revolves around these preventative measures that people have been talking about over and over the past month. I don't think that the scope of a policeman's job ever revolves around safety per se. I think it's really like an existential thing to them that I exist as a cop because crime exists. It's really criminality that really justifies why they are here. And I want to talk about how, like in the school system, we just paused SROs on school campuses. Like these are kids that are trying to better their lives. They're kids, and having a police officer roam around just implies criminality. It's sending that message. It's not about safety. It's about a message that you're sending these children that some of them are criminals. And I think you should extend that to a community spectrum when you think about cops roaming around the streets. I want to talk about this concept of concept creep, when something is rare, but somebody is looking for it. The goalposts keep getting moved, and the scope of what a crime is, it just keeps becoming broader and more vague. And that's why we always have to have new policies created every few years. I think it's about like self-validation in a policeman's head. So yeah, safety, I think, it's not even part of their scope of what their job is. I don't see the presence of a gun and a person with so much protection if and when there's like strange amount of power is abused. I don't see that as safety. I recently had to call a mental health crisis line because I was witnessing a breakdown, and they told me to call 911. And I don't know. That's what we're talking about. We need better outlets in place. So yeah, that deal in that framework of safety for people. So I just want to say thank you, Vice Mayor Fleming, for bringing that up. I yield my time.
Thank you. The next public comment will be from Carla. Carla, I've enabled your speaking permissions. Can you please unmute your microphone?
Yes, got it.
Great. There is a 3-minute timer on your screen. Please identify yourself for public record if you so choose, and your time begins now.
Sure. My name is Carla Viking. I'm a longtime resident of Santa Rosa. And I just wanted to, first of all, thank you. I really appreciate all the listening you guys have been doing. I would like to point out, I really liked what Mayor Schwedholm had asked in a previous meeting about getting more data on what calls are actually being serviced by the police department. I think if the committee or the subcommittee, but also the council and even the public eventually had an understanding of more data, who's calling and why, I think that could really help us figure out where we could do some restructuring. So I'd like to ask for you guys to continue requesting more data. Another thing I'd like to talk about is not only what kinds of calls, but who is calling. I have a concern about people weaponizing the police department, like calling because they have a bias or a grievance and inserting a police officer where they don't need to be. So I don't have some perfect solution for that, but it's just something I wanted to bring up because I would hate to see that happen, you know? And then also I would really like to ask you guys to find ways to have serious oversight over the police department, something with teeth, something with community accountability that maybe goes beyond the auditor, or at least placing an auditor, I feels like a good first step. So anyway, I wanted to thank you for all those things. The other thing I wanted to point out is that I'm only able to be on this call because I have internet access and I work from home. So I feel like we're probably missing a lot of people right now. And so I would just encourage you guys, hope that there's other ways that you're reaching out in the community to get more feedback so that it's not just us who are privileged enough to call in. So thank you so much.
Okay, seeing no additional hands raised, I'm going to move on to voice message public comments on item 4.1, which we did not receive any. And for email public comment, we did not receive any of those either.
All right, thank you. We'll bring it back to the subcommittee. After hearing that, we had the discussion that the vice mayor wanted to have. What does it mean to be safe in our community? Regarding the initial mission or scope, are we good with the draft language there? That's going to be a living document, or is there any other specific language we would like to be inserted in here before, lack of a better word, we go to press? Mr. Sawyer, your hand's up. I don't know if that's a new up or. Okay. Ms. Vice Mayor, you had something you want to say?
Yeah, would you one more time for everybody, including myself, say what the mission is?
So the draft language that we started is the City Council's Public Safety Subcommittee is charged with reviewing public safety issues, annual reports, and after action reports for emergency services, fire, and police. Additionally, the Public Safety Subcommittee will review Santa Rosa's public safety policies and procedures and the independent police auditor function.
Okay, and so so if we accept it as is today, we have the opportunity to amend it as we go forward and learn more and add more. Oh,
absolutely. You know, for me, this is more just an attempt to get our arms around it. Where do we start the discussion? But absolutely, I think this has got to be a living, breathing document as we learn more from our community and the exploration of the additional work on this subcommittee.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Madam City Attorney, again, I've been on different subcommittees with different rules. Would you suggest we take a vote on this, or I just heard like the 3 affirmative heads nodding? What would be your preference?
It would be nice to have a vote.
Okay. I would entertain a motion from either of you.
So moved.
We have a motion, and I saw his lips move. Second. Any additional conversation?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So oftentimes with this, what we're developing here is a very simple mission statement, and mission statements can change. And I expect this one may change in the future, depending on what paths we go down. So the previous caller mentioned the nature of you, and you had mentioned this yourself, Mayor, the nature of the calls and looking into and who are the callers. Would these be topics that we would be describing to future agenda items? Oftentimes it's easy to start making mission statements to be too long and wordy. So I assume that as these types of questions come up and things that need research, that we'll be adding them to our agenda. One more good reason why it's so important to have the community weighing in to begin that list of future agenda items.
Absolutely. So my interpretation of public safety issues, if this subcommittee believes understanding the number of calls, who the callers are, the nature of the calls would help us in guiding the policies and procedures that we would provide feedback on, absolutely, I believe it falls within that parameters. That's a public safety issue to me.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Oh, go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Where would so we've got scope and mission. Is it something that we could talk about later, having a vision? Because where I'm going, when I think with my earlier comments, is something that, the vision of this subcommittee, and hopefully the council could adopt this, is that Santa Rosa is a safe place for all people who live here or who come here to visit, or something like that, something really simple.
Absolutely. And I think the room for that would be on future agenda items. We could table that or put that on the next agenda if you so choose, and we can start that discussion so staff's prepared to let's talk about what vision statements are. And my only interest is that we're consistent with we're not in conflict with other vision statements related to the city operation. But absolutely, it'd be a wonderful place to have a discussion.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, with that, we have a motion and a second. Madam City Clerk, can we do a roll call vote, please?
It's Councilmember Sawyer.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fleming.
Aye.
Mayor Schwedhelm.
Aye.
Passes with 3 ayes.
Great. Thank you. Item 4.2, 8 can't wait. Mr. City Manager, would you like to introduce the presenter?
Yes, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Navarro to do the presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor Schwedhelm, Vice Mayor Fleming, and Councilmember Sawyer. Thank you for having us here today. Let me make sure my screen is. I'm sorry, I have a quick technical difficulty here. Okay, got it. So thank you for having me here, Rainer Navarro, Chief of Police. I wanted to start off and with this presentation regarding our 8 Can't Wait, just by really quickly mentioning our mission. You had mentioned the mission for the Public Safety Subcommittee. The mission for the Santa Rosa Police Department is to be committed to making Santa Rosa a safe place to live, work, and play. And our vision is to be recognized as the standard of excellence in policing. That this is going to be known as a great place to work, and that we are proactive, progressive, and professional towards fulfilling our mission. I have about 10 slides or 9 slides to share with you today regarding 8 Can't Wait. And we have been looking at over the last month, looking at 8 Can't Wait and how we how we measure up to that campaign that has been it's a national campaign that's been pushed out, and we recently put this onto our website, and so people can access that. And I'll get you a website here, but it is changed for the better, and we will be able to we've made that available to the public. So if we can go to the first slide. Thank you. So there's 8 different measures of this 8 Can't Wait campaign. The first one is banning chokeholds. The city of Santa Rosa, or the Santa Rosa Police Department, has never authorized chokeholds or bar arm restraints. Those are just basically any type of way to grab somebody around the neck. What we did have that was in our use of force policy up until June was the carotid restraint. As of June 9th, I made the decision to take the carotid restraint out of our use of force policy, and so it is no longer there. The carotid restraint had been a part of our use of force policy for probably at least as long as I've been here, which has been 28 years or more. What we have determined is that, over the years, we have had opportunities to become better trained and to have additional tools available to address the safety of our officers and the safety of the people that we are taking into custody. We have more training, which includes de-escalation training, defensive tactics training, and then we also have equipment that has helped us out now, such as the tasers and body-worn cameras, which helps with the actions and reactions of both officers and the people that we come into contact with. So we, as of June 9th, I made a decision to take that out. I think you will see that this is a trend. There's a lot of conversation going on throughout the state of California at this point. Next slide, please. So the next bullet point on the 8 Can't Wait is requiring de-escalation. So our training includes de-escalation techniques to reduce the need to use force during any encounters. We incorporate this into all different aspects of our training. So anytime we discuss use of force, we discuss the de-escalation use of force. So for example, we have defensive tactics training where we're talking about how to control somebody. We'll talk about how to de-escalate once there's compliance. During firearms training, whether it's out in the range or we're having some classroom instruction, we'll talk about how to de-escalate quickly and how to render first aid. And then we have a force option simulator that we received through a grant a few years ago, and it's an opportunity for us to work within a simulator and provide kind of a real-world instruction in a safe environment. And we can actually flip from one type of use of force to another, and a lot of it is based on the reaction by the officer and what is going on with the video that is occurring. So we can the instructor can actually change the scenario based on the actions of the officer, which helps us in our de-escalation techniques and training. And then we strive for de-escalation in the field whenever possible. We only use force as necessary based on the circumstances, and that is in our policy, our use of force policy 300, which is it's available on our website. The next slide, please. The use of force continuum, that's the next bullet on the 8 Can't Wait. We have our use of force policy is divided up into 3 different areas: low, medium, and high levels. Officers can go from one to another, but shall only use the amount of force of force that's reasonably necessary given the facts and the totality of the circumstances that we just talked about. These are circumstances that are known to or perceived by the officer at the time. And this is straight out of the California Penal Code 835. Some examples of some of these use of force options are low options are verbal. So, it may be us providing an order or asking a question. It could be uniform presence, so just showing up to an incident or on a traffic stop. Your verbal presence or your actual presence is a low level. Again, verbal commands, our demeanor. We may have to actually restrain somebody, so a firm grip or gesture, trying to gain control of somebody who's trying to walk away. We may have to hold somebody in a control hold, which helps us better control somebody in a position where they're not able to get away. And the other areas of low use of force could be the visual deployment of a canine or some type of audible display or what we call pain compliance, which is, when have somebody in a control hold and they try to get away from you, we apply some pressure, and then once they comply, you release the pressure from whatever you're doing. The medium level, those are what we call personal body weapons. So if you're in a close environment with somebody, and an officer or a person turns on an officer, and a fight starts, using somebody's hands or feet to kick them away, those would be personal body weapons. Control and impact devices, that is your baton, other less lethal. Your deployment of canines to apprehend people, and chemical agents such as our OC spray, and electronic control devices, which are commonly referred to as tasers. Lethal force is anything that's basically lethal. So that is our firearm, or if for some unforeseen circumstances, there's another, something else happens and there's another, something else another piece of equipment is used, that's lethal force, but it's usually regarded as a firearm. The training that we do outlines the factors that are used to determine when there's reasonable use of force, and we take things, certain factors into play, such as the individual, the age of the individual, any type of disability, known or perceived, the seriousness of the crime, mental state of the person, intoxication, or the proximity of weapons. And so we will provide verbal commands and warnings whenever possible prior to using any type of force. And a lot of times that is, we're able to gain control of a situation through either a visual show or a verbal command prior to using force. Next slide, please. And then continuing on this use force continuum, I mentioned it earlier, whenever there's force that's used, medical attention is immediately sought. We have the opportunity and to have an ambulance that is usually close by, and we have our fire department, which have paramedics on their rigs, and so we can call for medical attention immediately and get people attention while we're still even in the field and on scene. And then if there's further medical attention that's needed, we will get somebody to a hospital. Our ultimate objective in any encounter is to gain voluntary compliance and avoid injury whenever possible. Next slide, please. The next bullet point is requiring a warning before shooting. So again, this is something that changed recently with the passing of AB 392 and SB 230 and went into effect in January of 2020. All officers per the penal code will, when reasonable, identify themselves as an officer and warn before using any type of force, including firing a weapon. This warning is incorporated into our ongoing firearms training. It's a practice that we've had, and it's a practice that we've talked about and trained on prior to 2020, but it's something that has been incorporated and codified into law, and so we do address that in our training. And whenever reasonable, is sometimes something may happen very quickly. And so but whenever we can, we are going to be providing a warning before we use force. Next slide, please. Restricting shooting at moving vehicles was another bullet point. This is a very dangerous tactic. We have never allowed our officers or within our use of force policy to shoot at moving vehicles unless it's in a defensive life. Vehicles moving and somebody losing control of a car can be extremely dangerous, and it's not a practice that we use. This is a tactic that might be seen in other states, but in California, it's generally followed statewide. That we don't do that, and it's part of our ongoing firearms training policy. One of the things that we do when we talk about when we have firearms training is probably the first half hour of our training is a classroom instruction going through our use of force policy and discussing the certain restrictions regarding the use of firearms. Next slide, please. So the exhausting all other means before shooting was another bullet point. The use of force is a critical concern, and it's something that we do not take lightly. It is a serious responsibility. Deadly force will only be used when necessary, and our use of force policy states in there that we should understand and respect the value of all human life and dignity without prejudice. And so we train on that. And again, we go over those, the use of force policy during defensive tactics and during firearms. Our officers, based on several policies, are entrusted to use well-reasoned discretion to determine the appropriate use of force. And we're trained in a variety of tools and tactics. And again, those are covered in the variety of trainings that we use. Next slide, please. So duty to intervene is, I've heard a lot of people being concerned about officers who don't feel that they can speak up if they see something that's wrong. And I think this goes back to, it's something that I tell my kids, or I was telling my kids when they were young, if you see something, say something. And that goes without saying within our department. If officers have a duty to intervene, and our policy explicitly states that any officer that is present and observing another officer using force that's clearly beyond what is objectively reasonable, that they shall intercede. And not only that, but they have to say something. And we have in our use of force that they will promptly report the observations to a supervisor, and we will look into the incident. We are all informal leaders here, and we have to not only support each other but hold each other accountable and learn and correct our behavior. And so those are statements that are stated within our use of force policy. And that goes into my last slide. If we can go to the last slide. Some of the, if you see something, or if an officer sees something and says something, the next step is to conduct an investigation. And so the last bullet point in the 8 count wait talks about requiring comprehensive reporting. all of our use of forces are documented. So it not only use of force, but complaints of use of force. So if somebody comes in and complains, we will initiate an inquiry and look into it immediately by a supervisor. Our officers are trained to immediately report use of force. They're required to document it in a report, and the supervisor will look into the use of force policy or the use of force incident, which is then reviewed by the chain of command, which includes a lieutenant and a captain, and you know, myself, if there's any indication that there's a concern. Our department utilizes a data system. It's called IA Pro. It's a software system that tracks use of force incidents and complaints. We use this information that we collect to send the required information to the Department of Justice. We also use this information in new laws such as AB 748 and SB 1421 to meet transparency and reporting mandates per the law. All of these incidents that meet the requirements of 1421 and AB 748 are posted to our transparency website. The tracking of our use of force is really it's an accountability tool that we have, and we use it for a couple different reasons. The first one is we use it for early intervention. We can track incidents that come in. So whether it's a use of force or a complaint, we can identify an issue early and often, and then we can take appropriate steps to address the situation and correct the behavior before it becomes a blatant issue. We do have what we call progressive discipline, and we use progressive action when we look at incidents. There may be an egregious situation where it immediately goes into a significant disciplinary issue. If it's a minor issue, such as I know we're talking about use of force, but if there's any minor issues such as rudeness, if it's a one-time, first-time offense, it could be something that we treat as a counseling session. But we look into all use of forces, and we use the tracking system that we have to make sure that we're timely in the investigations. And this is a tool that is available for the police auditor when we had one and when we have one in the future. It's an opportunity for the auditor to look at to evaluate how we're doing in our investigations. Excuse me. The last thing I'd like to say is we've used, or we're working with, I'm working with the California Chiefs Police Association, and we're looking very closely at trends and current laws that are in bills that are going to be going into effect and going through. We're tracking those, and again, we work with a vendor to maintain our use of force policies based on best practices and legal mandates, and we're working with other professionals throughout the state to really push and leading the nation in some of these efforts. And we have with our Cal Chiefs Association, there's a campaign called Leading the Way, and I encourage the community to look at that to see what we're doing statewide and how we're working locally within some of these guidelines. And with that, I'll take any questions regarding the It Can't Wait.
Thank you, Chief Navarro, for that presentation. I've got a couple questions, but let me start with Mr. Sawyer and Madam Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. This has to do with your presentation on the use of force continuum, and the reality of lethal force in Santa Rosa, where the subject died due to the use of that lethal force. Can you give me a sense of the frequency or the last time that we had an officer that deployed lethal force where the subject succumbed to that because of that lethal force?
So I can provide data in future conversations. I can't tell you the last time a firearm was used. That was back in 2017, where somebody had died. But we can have I can provide better data for you at a later subcommittee meeting.
I appreciate that, and it may have something. Actually, it's probably a joint question to Madam City Attorney, because it's one thing to deploy lethal force. The subject they strike the subject in the arm, and but there could be a secondary cause of death, and that's kind of what I'm trying to get down to, is the reality of that deployment. And so future, hearing it, getting the data for the future is fine with me. I want accuracy in that regard, and what that question will be very important to hear.
Yes, and again, since 2013, we've had one, and I'll confirm it, but we've had one firearm-related death.
Thank you.
And we can provide you with more information on that case when we provide you the general data.
Thank you very much.
Vice Mayor Fleming, do you have any questions at this time?
I do. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Chief, for your presentation and for implementing the changes that you already have implemented. I have a couple of questions for you, starting with the continuum of force. I'm wondering if there is a way for you in your department to continue to review when force is actually necessary and when there are greater opportunities for de-escalation, and what kind of process that might look like in your department.
I'm sorry, Vice Mayor. I had a technical glitch over here. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So what I was looking at when you presented the use of force continuum was the idea that I'm wondering if it might be possible to add even more, for lack of a better word, patience or forbearance to the use of force. Now, obviously, if something's really heated, we all know the difference between that. But I'm talking about for these lower level uses of force, something that falls in between showing up and your very presence there being, a low level use of force and a high level being a deployment of a firearm. But, I would imagine that there's a large amount in the middle there where there might be opportunities to include more patience and forbearance. And if you guys have the capacity to continue to look at that and see if there is ways to evaluate when force is actually needed versus when force is just more convenient than waiting.
I'm sorry about that. So yes, that's a very good question and statement. Again, we do constant training on how to de-escalate and how to approach. Some of the things that I didn't mention about was, we provide crisis intervention training to our officers, implicit bias training, and racial profiling training with our officers. So, many of those, and the crisis intervention training, that's something that it was a countywide grant that we have the opportunity to go to. I just went again in 2019, and it's those are valuable instruction that we gain to be able to use. It's kind of the soft skills that we can show up to a call, reason with people, and talk with people, and be able to address a situation. And the other thing our use of force, we responded to probably close to about 140,000 calls for service last year. Those are staff in the field going to those calls, and less than, I think it's less than 0.1% ever goes to a use of force issue. And so, it's use of force is something that we try to use it as a last resort. We try to address a situation verbally before anything else, and it's something that we will continue to strive to do. And we're continuing to look at how to implement even better training to continue that trend.
I'm glad to hear that. I know from my own experience responding to emergency calls as a social worker, sometimes you just have to sit there for a few hours and wait for someone to, people eventually, will tire out and calm down. And so I'm glad to hear that you guys continue to work on that. There's another thing that you brought up, which is the requirement of an officer to report if they see, to one, intervene, and two, to report if they see another officer using what's beyond reasonable force. And I'm wondering if you can speak to what is commonly known fact that there are repercussions for officers who do report other officers overusing force and not getting backups when they call for them, and other sorts of internal repercussions, and how what some of your thoughts are on helping officers to change some of the culture so that we can have a safer community.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very good question. We have done I think we've done a very good job over the years at developing a culture where we hold ourselves to a higher standard. And I can tell you that we do hold ourselves accountable. And I think that there's, I think one of the things that happens is, we see something that happens 1,000 miles away, is that the same thing that's happening here at the Santa Rosa Police Department? Again, I can tell you that, we developed a culture where we're talking about within our training, we're talking about using reasonable force, and we're talking about intervening and interceding. And that doesn't even include, that's not only us, but if we happen to go on a call with another agency, we have to address that situation. And so I can tell you that we've developed that culture. It's been in effect for a couple of chiefs now. And the people that I hire, those are some of the things that I ask and I question to make sure that that is something that they're prepared to do. I think that there's sometimes there's always, in any job or profession, or even in school, you may have, there may be peer pressure, but we are, again, we're in a profession where, we have a lot of authority, and we cannot take that lightly. And our officers are told over and over again and instructed, and it's enforced, it's reinforced through our discussions that they shall intervene. And because we don't want a situation, especially now with, we wear body-worn cameras, so our actions are recorded by us, and they're also recorded by other people. So I think that's the part of the training, is that, we're telling people, hey, we're on camera. You're one way or the other. If there's something that bad happens, we're going to find out about it. And so I think we do a really good job here at holding each other accountable.
And then one follow-up on that, and then I have one last question, which is there a way for us, or for you within the department, or for the city, to support officers who do outstanding work in terms of holding themselves and each other accountable? Can we, not all have sticks here, but have carrots for people who, are leaders in this regard?
Yes, I heard that comment. I think it was last night during one of the on public comment. We do offer opportunities to acknowledge officers who do good work, no matter what. It could be something that happens in the office or happens in the field. Many times we have had instances where, somebody was able to talk somebody off of a ledge, literally, during a crisis situation. We have an officer or an employee of the month that we recognize an employee every single month for outstanding work based on our values, mission, vision, and values. At the end of the year, we have an awards banquet where we acknowledge an employee of the year. We also extend it out to a civilian of the year, officer of the year, employee of the year, and we acknowledge good work that's done in the field when people are able to bring things under control, save a life, and we have awards that are given when lives are saved or a specific situation occurs where they put themselves in danger and are able to save lives.
I'm glad to hear that, and I'm hopeful that you can continue to expand that in ways to support our officers who are doing that work. And then my last question is around some of the transparency issues that you talked about toward the end, and that you do report your findings to the Department of Justice. Something that's been asked of me many times is, how can the public access some of these things? And I know that, and I'm not familiar with all the ins and outs of public safety records, but or records on officers and public safety, but I do know that it's difficult if not impossible in many cases, for the public to access records of officers who have been found to have acted or deployed use inappropriately. What can you tell us about the public's ability to access this type of information and where we stand now?
So we, on our website, santarosapd.org, we do have a transparency page, and it allows people to look at our annual reports, the incidents that are required by law to send out per SB 1421 and AB 748. We put that information on that website. We also have opportunities for people to engage with the police department through the community police experience, and that allows people to come in, experience, go through a classroom that takes about 8 weeks, and we actually have them for the youth also. But that helps with people better understand what we do on a daily basis, why, when, and why we may use force. They actually go through a class regarding that. And so those are ways that we're trying to be more transparent to allow people to experience that and have those discussions. And I think community policing in general is an opportunity to build on the transparency. You have the transparency on our website and trying to push things out from a social media standpoint. I think we can always do better. I think we can do better at telling the good things that we do, right? And be transparent on both sides. But again, I think there's an actual engagement piece that helps with the transparency, because you can, if you build the trust through that engagement, it's going to allow easier transparency for people to see what's going on.
Yeah, and while I totally agree with that, this moment is not calling for that in particular. This moment, people are calling for information on inappropriate actions, not information on the good work that we know that most officers do. People want to know. And so to that end, what I'm trying to understand, because I'm not, intimately acquainted with those state level regulations, is if I'm an individual resident and I want to know if, if an officer has been found to have been guilty of some sort of misconduct, but it remains on our force, is that something that I could find out?
There are police bill of rights that and due process laws that we have to abide by. I can't tell you. I mentioned the California Police Chiefs Association. One of the things that we are looking at that I'm actively involved in is looking at how do we address, officers that may be either terminated or they quit before being terminated, and they try to go to another agency to work on a statewide level to see what that looks like and how we can become more transparent and make that really a national model. So, but we do have due process locally that we do address or have to work within. We can tell what we do is we do address if there's a complaint that comes in from the community, we get back to every single one of those complaints. So if there's something that's sustained, we will let the complainant know that something's been sustained, but we don't go into the type of discipline.
And is the police bill of rights, is that a state level? Is that legal? Is that a law at the state, or is that federal, or is that negotiated through our POA?
It's a state law.
It's a state law. Okay. At some point in the future, I won't hold the floor any longer since it's been a little while, but I'd be very interested to hear a presentation on what exactly the police bill of rights are and how that helps or hinders us in achieving our mission and vision on this subcommittee. Thank you very much.
I've already noted that, Vice Mayor, and when you get to future agenda topics, I would say the two things that I'm hearing are a presentation on the data that we have around policing, and this particular topic about the Officer Bill of Rights. We will make sure that those are on the agenda coming forward.
Okay, thank you both for the information. I appreciate it.
And I'd suggest in that on the presentation on the Police Bill of Rights that we might also bring in some of the other laws that govern the privacy or the transparency of police officer records.
I think that'd be very helpful, because if I don't know the ins and outs of this, I'm not sure how the public would know the ins and outs of this.
And as a segue to that, it might be for Madam City Attorney, is the Brady list that I believe is kept by the Sonoma County District Attorney, is that a public record?
I actually don't know the answer to that question, but I can check, and I don't know if the police chief knows that offhand.
I will have to confirm.
Okay. So that might be a future topic about the Brady list. How does one get on that, and then who has access to that? Okay, Chief, I've got several questions on the, I'll use the order that you gave them, because you started with the Carotid, which I think on the actual campaign 0 is number 3. But on that, looking at our policy, when will section 300.6 be deleted from our policy that's currently online?
That has, we're working on that right now. We have, I signed it on June 9th, and it has been deleted. We've made notice to the staff, and there's a process that takes place as it goes through and to actually be posted. So we're working on that. I can get you. That should be fairly quick.
That would be great, just because I know I'm not the only one on council that folks are going to. Again, it's great. I pulled up all the policies, and some of the stuff is still in there. So as we're making these changes, I really encourage a quick update to those, so members of the public don't repeat the same questions that have already been answered. And then related to that, and again, this might be a city attorney question, are the training plans public record? If someone did a Public Records Act request that I want to see the training plan for the Santa Rosa Police Department firearms training, is that a public document?
Again, I will have to get back to you. I would believe that most, although not all, would be, because there would certainly be some that would be confidential due to public safety issues. So let me get back to you on that. I'm making a list of things.
Mr. Mayor, I can tell you that we have been posting our training plans to the website. So that was another law that went into effect, and so we are now again Ms. Gallagher, we'll have to double check on what exactly that means, but we have been posting training plans to the website, and we can provide more data for you later.
And Chief, where would those be on the website? Because I know it's fairly easy for me to find policies. I didn't see any training plans, but I didn't search the entire site. So could you share for the subcommittee and members of the public, where would we find those training plans that are on the website?
I will, I'm searching for that right now. We've had some updates on the website, but I can provide you that information next time.
That would be great. Sorry, don't mean to put you on the spot, but
yeah. In fact, I think what we'll do is the next time we'll have a slide and we'll have the particular websites where you can access these sites on there.
Okay.
And Mr. Mayor, the Brady list is actually it's a district attorney list. So I think that we can probably check with the DA, but that's their list.
Correct. It just goes to the vice mayor's point that if people wanted information about this, you know, and I don't want to put you on the spot, hey, define the Brady list, but it might be another topic of conversation for this group, because it is more information about conduct of officers.
Thank you.
Okay, then the next one, you talked about de-escalate. And let me just read you a paragraph and tell me if you believe this is consistent with the city's policy. So with the de-escalate, and again on the campaign 0, it says require officers to de-escalate situations when possible before using force. Require officers to de-escalate situations where possible by communicating with subjects, maintaining distance, and otherwise eliminating the need to use force. Do you think that statement is consistent with current SRPD policy?
I believe it is.
And I would agree with you. And part of the reason, again, goes back to my earlier question about what's online. So currently, that is the language off the campaign 0, 8 can't wait. I believe we are in compliance with that, but the website shows that the city of Santa Rosa is not in compliance with it. And I'm just wondering if you or any of your staff had made efforts to reach out to that campaign, the 8 can't wait, to update what those policies are, because online, as recently as today, they say we're only in compliance with 1 of the 8. But again, to me, it's a little bit, okay, is it wordsmithing? Have you read it lately? What are your thoughts on that, Chief? And have you guys taken any action to get that information to that site?
That's a very good question, Mr. Mayor. We can definitely reach out. I'll have to check with my staff, but we can reach out to that group. I can tell you that we have been having conversations with several. We're starting to have conversations. Most of them have been listening, and I think that this is an important, time. This is, I think, a transition here where we still listen, but it's an opportunity to start educating where we are. But our main focus, to be honest with you, has been to listen, listen to the community, listen for feedback, and we've been trying to be, trying not to look defensive, but we will get that information out, and we will start talking to these groups and making sure that clarifying the things that are online.
That'd be great. Just again, as all of us on council are realizing, a lot of community members are using that as a resource to evaluate the police department. And again, I think I would argue that we're in compliance more than just 1. So if that is a resource, it'd be great to go to the resource. And then the last one, I have a question about the 8, requiring comprehensive reporting. An example that the site uses is reporting instances where an officer threatens a civilian with a firearm. So is that part of our policy, or what is the current SRPD policy in regards to when a weapon is drawn and pointed at another person? Is that reportable?
I think 99% of the time there's going to be an arrest in a situation like that. I mean, we do report when use of force is used. We don't report when a firearm is taken out of a holster or always pointed at somebody. There are times where it's a show of force, so but it's not used. Officers will report place in their report what they did, and it's also recorded on the body-worn camera. But as far as like DOJ, we don't report those to DOJ, but it is included in the report that the officer writes.
So I guess then for feedback, I would be interested in developing a system that if a firearm is pointed at someone, that information is captured. What that looks like, where it is, again, that's just feedback from one of us. I think that would be helpful for our policies to establish that. So those are all the questions I have. Mr. Sawyer, do you have another question?
I do, thank you, Mayor. And it has to do with the training that happens before the on-the-job training starts with cadets coming out of our academy, either here in Santa Rosa, Sonoma County, or elsewhere. And the duty to intervene is an interesting one to me, because I'm curious. And Chief, I apologize if I'm if I'm asking you a question about an organization that you may not know the entire curriculum of. But I'm curious as to whether or not there are scenarios that are carried out in the academy that deal with the duty to intervene. Because that is really kind of, in some ways, comes to the crux of why we are having this conversation today, is officers that allowed other officers to act inappropriately. And that's just one piece, but it is in part why we are having this very important conversation today and in the future. So I'm curious to know if in the curriculum of the police academy is whether they put a cadet through a scenario where they watch an officer treating a role player, which is how they try to get this as close to reality as possible, where that officer or that cadet is using excessive force, and to watch and see what the other cadets do when they witness it. And if you don't know the answer to that, it might be interesting to get the curriculum of our police academy here that the JC puts on, and to find out because that's where so many of the officers begin. Does that parallel what we're trying to accomplish with our police department here in Santa Rosa? So do you happen to know if that's part of the curriculum? The duty to intervene?
So I do know that they have an ethics class that they teach at the academy. In fact, retired Chief Jeff Weaver from Sebastopol PD does a lot with their academy. I don't know the exact scenarios that they use up there at this point, but I do know that they have an ethics class, and the ethics class goes into you see something, say something, duty to intervene in all different types of scenarios. But we can look forward further into what the training plan looks like.
I'd be curious to know, because it would be I think probably in looking at the importance of that duty and having as close to real life situation as an academy can provide. Through the process that we are going through now, and I know that post is, I don't know about all the details about who dictates the curriculum for these academies, but we may be able to share some of what we learn to heighten the awareness of something like duty to intervene, which could elevate the importance to our cadets so that they know the importance when they are coming to the Centers of Police Department looking for a job.
Yes, we have numerous officers who go up. They are recruit training officers up there, and then we have our officers who do check in on a weekly basis with our cadets that are at the academy, and they have the opportunity to have in the informal instruction, and then they also they're part of the formal instruction, including we do have instructors up there for defensive tactics and firearms. So I think it's a great idea to institute and implement some of our culture into the academy, and I do know that they're they're willing to listen and create best practices for the cadets that they're training out there.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And just for your edification, I know the post commission, I think the commission is appointed by the governor and they approve all training, which goes for whether it's a regional academy like here at the JC or the larger departments have their own, but the standards are the same across the state because post issues those certificates. So
yeah. Who knows, maybe Santa Rosa will be helping write some of the post requirements.
I think that would be wonderful. Madam Vice Mayor, you've got a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to, the mayor mentioned earlier, Chief, that he was just one person, but I wanted to offer my broad support for the suggestions brought forth by Councilmember Sawyer and by Mayor Schwedhelm, and in terms of transparency through our website and through looking into the practices that are used at the academy and for recruits, in case it helps to have for you to hear a majority of the subcommittee have support for something if that's something you need in order to have direction to go forward.
Okay, thank you. And all of the policies, our transparency, all the transparency documents, it can be found on srcity.org/change-for-the-better. So if it's not there, we are working on it, but that's going to be that is the website for all of our transparency and documents that go on there.
Thank you for that resource.
Great, thanks for all the information. Seeing no other questions from the subcommittee, we're now taking public comments on item 4.2, 8 can't wait. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. You have 3 minutes. Madam Host or Clerk, would you like to take it from here?
Okay, thank you, Mayor. First public comment will be from Eric, followed by Lynn. Eric, I've enabled your speaking permissions. Please unmute your microphone.
I have.
Thank you. There's a timer on your screen for 3 minutes. Please identify yourself for public record if you so choose, and your time begins now.
Thank you very much. This is Eric Frazier in Santa Rosa. Chief Navarro, thank you very much for that update on the 8 Can't Wait program. There's a couple things you said, perhaps I'm taking them out of context, but they were sort of disconcerting. One little thing, or one big thing, was that you have 140,000 calls a year that you respond to, but less than 0.1% involve the use of force. I'd really like to see those numbers a little bit to believe that that is true. Some of the other things you said is an officer just showing up is a show of force. And that probably what leads people to conclude that SROs are not necessary in schools. We don't need to be showing force. What you're actually craving is power. Another thing that was said was de-escalation once we have compliance. It seems to me with the framework that's laid down in policy 300 and 300.5 that you have with the training, that framework can be used now to analyze what happened with the protesters. And I do take offense because what I witnessed was not a de-escalation technique, but actually a militarized exercise to show force, to ramp up force. And it was really, it's hard to actually get out of my mind because I just never expected that to happen in Santa Rosa. So there's something deeply flawed with the training, with how you understand your training and the roles you play. One additional quote, Chief Rainier, was you were reading off a slide and you said in the mandatory reporting, in the duty to intervene, that you're informal leaders. No, you're mandatory reporters. You have a legal obligation. And in fact, does that duty to intervene extend to unprocessed rape kits? does it extend to reported crimes not being investigated? I think that's really key for the public to know. In addition, the public really needs to understand its role. And as we pointed out, that the duty to intervene is buttressed by the public being able to report via video what actually went down. Lastly, I just want to read a quick quote about force versus power. Force is the fundamental result of an interaction between two objects, while power is an expression of energy consumed over time, work, which force is an element. Force and power can both be described and measured, but force is an actual physical phenomenon, and power in itself is not. You need to understand that this community needs to be empowered, including everybody, including those that are sworn to protect us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. The next public comment will be from Lynn, followed by Bob. Lynn, I've enabled your speaking permissions. Please unmute your microphone.
Hello.
Hi, Lynn. Do you see a timer on your screen?
I do indeed.
Terrific. Please identify yourself for public record if you so choose, and your time begins now.
My name is Lynn Lanto, and I had a few questions regarding what the police are saying that they're changing or saying that they're not needing to change. What steps are police going through to pass along emergencies they're unqualified for, such as mental health emergency or abuse, whether physical or domestic, or otherwise as a social worker or a mental health professional is trained to help, while police may go to use of force instead of referral to the health system? Because as emergency calls are made, police are sent first, and the police are supposed to make referrals, and they're not doing that. Instead, they're saying, oh, I don't know how to deal with the situation. Let me use a show of force. That being said, are officers being held accountable for use of force, such as drawing weapon, which is extremely traumatizing for many? Remember that abuse is not just physical, but emotional as well. And if you truly want to change how police are viewed in the minds of people, you need to eliminate all abuse. What efforts are police making to lessen their abusive existence in many people's lives and experiences? Amends have to be made. Also, what is the $1.6 million increase in police budget used for? If you're truly interested in helping society, protecting and serving, you know that that money is better used for social programs, not programs of force. I yield my time.
Thank you. The next public comment will be from Bob, followed by Manny. Bob, I've enabled your speaking permissions. Can you please unmute your microphone?
I did.
Terrific. Do you see a timer on your screen with 3 minutes on the clock?
I do, yes.
Thank you. Please identify yourself for public record if you choose, and your time begins now.
My name is Bob Wilson. I'm a resident of Santa Rosa. And thank you, Chief Navarro, for taking the initiative, the council's support for you to implement the 8 can't wait items in your department. I do urge you to make a few changes. These are on your slides. You used the words when possible. That leaves a lot of room for discretion. I suggest that be made mandatory in several of the items. And you also use should, like should report, to must. I think that's very important that the final policy have those things in. And as the subcommittee is working on the scope of their work and things they're going to be addressing and looking at, this is a great start, but there's so much more out there. I'm sure you agree, and the public is certainly giving a lot of input here, that this is a much broader question. There's a lot more things to look at than 8 can't wait. And we really don't have to invent the wheel here in Santa Rosa. There's been a lot of work done in previous years and currently now for sure by major organizations on this. So the resources are available. The case studies are available. Chief mentioned the Leading the Way from Cal Chiefs. The International Association of Chiefs of Police has an initiative called Shaping the Future of Policing Profession. A lot of good resources there and policies, especially wonderful ones on community police engagement. And also there's a great national resource, the National Network for Safe Communities, which is an organization located at John Jay College in New York City. And I'm sure the question that Vice Mayor Fleming brought up about what is a safe community, which I love that question. I'm sure there's definitions of that, and they have case studies of other communities who have wrestled with that definition, and that's available to instruct and educate the committee and the public. I'm curious how we can find out how to submit these resources to the subcommittee so that they can be considered. So thank you for doing this important work. I yield my time.
Thank you, Bob. The next public comment will be from Manny, followed by Keith. Manny, I have enabled your speaking permissions. Please unmute your microphone.
Hello.
Hi, there's a timer on your screen. Can you confirm you see it?
Yep.
Great. Please identify yourself for public record if you so choose, and your time begins now.
Hey guys, Roman here. I just wanted to address two of the slides, the first being requiring de-escalation and the languaging around that. I heard Chief Navarro saying that de-escalation occurs after compliance. I think that languaging is really important because it's true of what we've seen that police officers escalate a situation until compliance is achieved, oftentimes forcibly, and then the de-escalation occurs. I think that the de-escalation should be the mentality going in from the get-go. You see these people really, they might be suffering PTSD from previous treatment from officers and they're not acting accordingly. Anybody who's really confronted by a cop really, I feel, has some sort of heightened sense of alert or, just reacting in a way that's anxiety ridden. There's a lot of coverage going on about, autistic people, being murdered and because of their oversensitivity to stressful situations and how cops initially react to it. I think the de-escalation really needs to come before the compliance. That should be part of the training. I don't see what the purpose of de-escalation after compliance, after a person is calmed down, after a person is restrained. What are you de-escalating? You're de-escalating the escalation that occurred beforehand. So I think that's just odd. The second thing is the duty to intervene, specifically to the reporting portion. It said that another officer witnessing excessive use of force should promptly report it. I think the language there, it doesn't really imply the possibility for reprimand for failing to do so. I think that the wording should be another officer witnessing excessive use of force must promptly report it. So should be obligated to. A citizen who witnesses a crime and doesn't report it, they can be charged with being an accomplice to a crime. So I think there's a big disconnect there. I'd like the language changed in that policy because this is where it begins. The written policy is so crucial to ensure action can be made upon it, correction can be made upon it, and that vaguity around the word "should." I don't think that's. I just don't think that's appropriate. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. The next public comment will be from Keith. Keith, I've enabled your speaking permissions. Can you confirm you see a timer on your screen once you unmute your microphone?
I see it.
Terrific. Please identify yourself for public record if you choose, and your time begins now.
My name is Keith Reinhardt. Please stop me if I'm off topic. I want to tell a sad story about a call for service or a suicide last May 7th, 2019. The subject was holding a knife to his throat and threatening to kill himself. Santa Rosa police responded, and I also responded because I knew this party. And while I was there, I tried to get the officer to offer the services of MST. And because this person was also on a court supervised release, I asked the officer if he would violate him because clearly he was a danger to himself or others. And the officer in question refused to do that. And I'm glad the vice mayor is here because I know the mayor's heard this and the chief has heard this from me. But that boy was my son, Liam Connor Reinhardt. Say his name, Liam Connor Reinhardt. May have died in the future, may have been thinking about killing himself for a long time. But that failure to engage MST was, in my opinion, an immediate cause of his death the next day by his own hand. Secondly, cops in schools. And I know we've talked about this. I believe the gang task force was begun by the city council and the police to infiltrate our schools and find out information about kids who may be coming into gang activity. As you know, they've been in our schools since before Columbine. So in that it's now called the Violence Prevention Partnership, I would suggest that we defund the Violence Prevention Partnership because I just think it's a fancy name for cops trying to get kids in trouble and put them into the schools to prison pipeline, even as I believe that Santa Rosa Police Department is the best agency we have in our county. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to do a quick refresh of my screen share. One moment. And that gave us some time to see any additional raised hands. Seeing none, Mayor, are you okay with me moving on to the recorded public comments?
Absolutely, thank you.
Hello, my name is Kitchi Marin. I'm calling regarding agenda item number 4.2, the 8 Can't Wait campaign. I'm currently 21 years old and I work at a special education school. When I was 14 and was to all accounts a white cis female, cops respected me, and when I went through a psychotic break, they were called and they helped me. This is how it should be for everyone. I have had several positive, personally protective experiences with police, but that is not all there has been. When I was 14, less than a week after the cops got called for my psychotic break and handled that well, another patient in the group home, a Black teen girl who was small like me, got intensely triggered, and the cops responded to a tripped escape alarm. When they found her, she was curled up in her closet. They dragged her out, held her down, and banged her head into the ground in an attempt to get her to stop screaming. She never attacked them, she had no weapon, and she was a slight girl while the cops were two large white men. They swore at her and gave her a black eye from slamming her head into the floor as she writhed in pain. She survived that assault, but not everyone does. She was small and young, needing mental health support, but that didn't matter for so many others like her. Police do not show respect. They do not even try to earn our respect. They are abusers of power, abusers of their badge, abusers of young children, igniters of injustice, and yes, police are simply murderers. If someone knows about a murder but doesn't come forward, they are guilty as an accomplice. All police are guilty. Instead, hire more firemen. Ever heard of a corrupt firefighter? Me either. Employ social workers who are trained to help, not to kill, unlike the police. Create crisis centers where people are not afraid to ask for help. Safety is possible, societal trust is possible, but not with police as they are, or even not possible with police at all. Police are dispatched to emergencies they are not prepared for, and they're expected to bear that burden. Encourage them to let social workers lead the response, to utilize the programs that are in place so these police officers, whose entire training is half as long as a hair barber's training and not as detailed for their community, can admit when they don't know what they're doing and back down. Thank you. Hello, my name is Kitchi Marin. I'm calling.
That concludes our public comment for 4.2.
Okay, I'll bring it back to the subcommittee. Any final comments or questions after hearing the public comment? Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, I think it's important for our listeners and this body, and I believe this body understands this, and the council ultimately, the entire community, to understand that in some ways, 8 Can't Wait is some of the more low-hanging fruit, especially because we are already engaged in these practices for the most part, and some that have been at least one recent, and most of the others are already in place. And I would agree that perhaps there is some language that could be changed to be a little more definitive as opposed to what could sound to be optional. But this is just the beginning, and this is one step. And I think it was an important step to take because it was on the tongues. 8 Can't Wait was on the tongues of so many people when we started this process a number of weeks ago. And so I think that there's nothing wrong with starting here, but it's important for the community to understand that this is, and there are a couple of very, with the police auditor discussion and the after action report, where we really get into some more of the substantive, in a way, some of the more substantive issues that can be a little bit mysterious to people, that this is just the beginning, and we have a long way to go. And this is very much focused on public safety, as opposed to the myriad other issues that deal with racism in America and white privilege. And so we know that, we understand that this is just the beginning. So I'm hoping that people that the listeners today and those that read about these in the paper understand that we are not going to always be dealing with softballs. That this is a beginning, and we will be at this for quite some time, drilling in and making our public safety officials part of the solution and not the problem.
Vice Mayor Fleming.
Thank you. I wanted to express my support for the caller who talked about the importance of terminology here. And one of the reasons why I think terminology is so important is for us as a city and as a legal entity, we can't enforce things if there's discretion. So a shall versus or a should versus a shall, or a must or a may, really do matter. And so I'd encourage us to look at, I mean, I don't know if it's within the chief's discretion to change that language from should to shall, but if it is, I would encourage you to do so. I'm only 1 of 3, but I think that that's really important. And I think that we ought to continue to explore, and I know this might sound a little bit philosophical or esoteric, but that we ought to continue to explore the term compliance. I know that this has been a long-standing thing, but what our relationship is with our community. So what is the purpose of compliance? Like in a situation where we're trying to get somebody, I'm going to use a really extreme example, to let go of a hostage. I mean, compliance seems awfully important, right? But in many interactions that I've witnessed with officers and that I hear about, compliance simply means doing what they say and acknowledging that they have power and control over the situation. And I think that is what we're hearing is at the root of many people's feeling unsafe, is this dynamic of control and power, where it may not be necessary to the survival of people, or may in fact raise the chances of danger. And as was brought up earlier, the relationship between criminality and danger. As we all know, for a long time, cannabis was illegal, and so is cannabis itself a dangerous substance? Well, as a society, we kind of now decided it's not. But that's a complicated example. But my point is that I've never met a person who doesn't break the law on a regular basis. I just haven't. People frequently, jaywalk or do things that are just not illegal. Now, is there every criminal a danger? I think it's something that we ought to continue to, and I know I've kind of gotten philosophical. So I'll rein it in and just say that language is important. I hope that we continue to look at it. Thank you.
Again, and on that same line, again, Chief, this is regarding the use of force policy, the 300.7, the duty to intercede, and I overlooked that, so I appreciate the caller actually commenting on that, because the policy does state officers shall intercede when seeing something like that, but they only should report it. And I think both of those should be shalls. I think it would just be consistent. So that's my feedback to the language specifically on those 8 can't wait. So with that, we've been at it now a little bit longer than an hour and a half. Why don't we start, we'll take a recess and reconvene at 4:05. 4:05. Thank you. Madam City Clerk, are we ready to continue?
Yes, I'm ready.
See if we get our Vice Mayor. Well, I've got it's 4:07, so let's reconvene. Madam City Clerk, could we do a roll call, please?
Yes, Councilmember Sawyer.
Here.
Vice Mayor Fleming. Mayor Schwedhelm.
Here.
Vice Mayor Fleming, have you joined us?
Indeed.
Thank you. Let the record show that all the subcommittee are present.
Great, thank you. Item 4.3, Mr. City Manager.
So this is an update and a request for some direction from the council, from the subcommittee. I'm going to be supplying the subcommittee and making the same documentation available to the general public in a concise format that will include the prior police auditor reports and the RFP that has been devised for police auditor services. This is to allow the subcommittee to provide input and the general public to provide input on the scope of work that is proposed in the RFP and allow us to then consider moving forward. But there's a secondary issue, and I want to make sure that the subcommittee is aware of that, which I believe they are. There is the community empowerment sessions. This is a topic that's going on in the community empowerment sessions, getting input on this. And I assume that the subcommittee is going to want to know what the results of those inputs are as we make a decision and move towards soliciting for a police auditor. But I didn't want to make that assumption without some guidance from the subcommittee. So again, we're going to be providing you with information. That information will be in your hands tomorrow and be available for the public tomorrow. It is in a variety of ways already available, but we're going to make it in a concise location. But I'm looking for a little guidance on how do you want to approach the information that's going to be garnered from the community empowerment session.
So thank you. And Mr. City Manager, could you also just give us, how did we get here today? Because everyone knows we had a police auditor, and we got a new chief, a whole bunch of things. Could you just give us an update as to how it came to be on this subcommittee?
So in brief, we did have a police auditor. That contract, perhaps we did have put out a solicitation at the same time. We had a chief of police retire. The current chief of police was going on listening sessions in the fall to make sure that he understood what the community needed from the police auditor contract. And I was doing a similar sort of question and answer conversation. A couple things happened in the midst of that. One of which was there was a series of events in the fall. We were then in discussions, Mayor, about actually standing up this subcommittee. I had pointed out that many jurisdictions in California had this subcommittee. I think the conversations that we already have had today are important conversations. Words mean everything. And I think that those are the kinds of conversations that we need to have about our policies, the one that just transpired earlier today. That was an essential part of establishing this subcommittee so that we could get this input from not just the council, but the public at large. So unfortunately, we also went into a shelter in place at about the same time we were going to have this conversation about standing up the subcommittee to get the input, this auditor function. We are where we are today, but that's where we are. And I'm going to, my assumption was that the subcommittee would want to wait for some of that input from the community empowerment sessions, but I didn't want to be presumptive in that request. We're prepared to come back and have a conversation about what is there. We can then provide you an update at that time at the next meeting about the calendar for that input, and then we can make some decisions together. But I just wanted to make sure that is a space that you all are comfortable with, or if you have other items that you need prior to revisiting the police auditor conversation.
Okay, and then just to confirm, in our recently approved budget, there is funding for this police auditor function.
That is correct.
Okay, great. Questions, Mr. Sawyer?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, two things. I definitely would like to capture the community input that we received yesterday. Very important. What I don't know is what is legally permissible. And so that'll be important to have a grasp of. Also, whether or not there is in a sense, a menu of possibilities for what the police auditor would be responsible for and what they would be reviewing, and how the auditor's position and this subcommittee, how we would, what is the nexus, how we would interact. So I have more questions than I have answers at this point. I really appreciate the opportunity to be looking at this position again, but I need some framework would be very helpful ultimately in being able to make a decision on what I might recommend. And I'm sure that the council as a body will have some questions around that same issue around what is permissible, what is legal, and where we actually can go. I want the public to have a real good sense of expectation.
Understood.
Vice Mayor Fleming.
Yes, thank you. So sort of tagging along with what the other subcommittee members mentioned around getting public input prior to making decisions around this, and also hearing from the full council, and then getting a deeper dive into how we got to where we are now. And I don't mean today where we are now, but how we ended up with a police auditor before, what worked, what didn't work, what we would do differently. And I have a feeling that when we go out and talk to the community, we're going to hear a lot about citizen oversight. And that's going to have to necessarily, if that's a direction that the community wants us to go in, and we're in agreement with the community in that regard, we're going to have to craft that position in a way that, dovetails and works hand in glove with that board. And so I think it would be jumping the gun to be definitive about the scope of that position at this point. And I would certainly need a lot more information. And a lot of folks who have come to be interested or not come to be interested, who have become activated in their interest by recent events, probably were not tracking what was going on, or may have been, but not everybody had the opportunity to track what was going on in the past of their last police officer. I'm still learning what was going on as it happened right before I got on council. So long answer to your question is I'd love to hear more. And I think that we need to have more opportunity to flesh out our vision and our mission here, as well as what the community is really needing from us. And it's premature at this point to become too narrow in our scope of what we're looking for in that position. That's my sentiment. Except that we are going to need someone.
Great, thank you for those comments. Yes, and I'm in agreement. I want more feedback. One of the things I also would like to see is what the Vice Mayor just mentioned with our previous experience with the auditor, what worked, what didn't work, what would we do differently? I am thinking that I might want to bring this up, or we may want to bring this up during our August 4th goal setting, because I know, Mr. City Manager, you have a lot of priorities on your plate. And I think this should be a topic to see, do we want to float this up to our tier 1 priorities? I'm not going to say where I'm coming from, but I think it'd be worthy of that discussion on August 4th, because I know there's a lot of community input. This is not going to be an easy endeavor, no matter which direction we go. But for me, this is going to be one of those priority things. So with that, why don't we go to public comment on this item? Madam City Clerk or Madam Host, could you facilitate that part of this conversation?
Thank you, Mayor. Now's the time on the agenda where we are hearing public comment on item 4.3, Police Auditor. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you are dialing via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. The first public comment will be from Manny, followed by Eric. Manny, I've unmuted enabled your speaking permissions. Can you please unmute your microphone?
Hello, City Clerk.
Hi, thank you. There is a timer on your screen. I do hear you. Do you see a timer on your screen for 3 minutes?
Yep.
Terrific. Please identify yourself for public record if you choose, and your time begins now.
Hey guys, Ramon again. First of all, I want to say thanks for hearing me earlier about the languaging. I'm liking the process. I mean, it's action, so even though 8 can't wait doesn't completely jive with me. Anyway, so during the Q&A, I brought up ILARO. I know it's a separate organization, it's an independent office, but I had spoken with Jerry Threet about his experience auditing law enforcement, and that program, it really had the public engagement portion down, but he had no access to data, really. He faced a lot of political resistance from certain supervisors and the sheriff's office. And if you read the 2017 report, the annual report, the sheriff's office challenged, if not completely ignored, all of his policy recommendations. And I've come to understand the previous Santa Rosa Police Department auditor had unencumbered access to data when conducting these investigations, but really no structure for the public engagement portion. So I really want to see us bridging that gap. Another thing is incorporating that public portion is probably going to require a lot of help. I hope the auditor receives the proper funding to perform these duties, hopefully with a team. And this responsibility, it really parallels with what we talked about earlier, an officer's duty to intervene. When the auditor discovers, some sort of foul play, if, he does, the ILARO director found multiple counts of corruption. I understand that's a separate organization, like I said, but if the auditor encounters corrupt investigative practice, he should be obligated to see that through, whether he has structure to reprimand or he's part of the process some way and can report it out to the community. I think transparency is really important with the public outreach portion. And in Jerry Threet's case, he didn't receive support because of his political standing with people. I hope that the SRPD auditor's ability to do his job doesn't hinge on how much politicians like him. I don't really know the whole story of why he got let go, but it sounded like he, made some people angry. So, I'd like to see all this. So proper funding, proper staffing, structure for reprimand or ensuring reprimand, and a means to report out to the community. I know it might be a tall order, but I believe in you guys. So thanks. I yield my time.
Thank you, Ramon. The next public comment will be from Eric. Eric, I have enabled your speaking permissions. Please unmute your microphone.
I have, thank you.
Thank you. Do you see a timer on your screen?
Yes.
Great. Please identify yourself for public record, and your time begins now.
Thank you very much. Eric Frazier in Santa Rosa. Thanks for the opportunity to address you again. It's on this particular item that I'm particularly disappointed that you didn't come with more prepared. After all, in recent history, there was a police auditor. It seemed like you should have been prepared to talk substantively amongst yourselves and with us about what went wrong, how you want to move forward. For some reason, you're not really picking up on the urgency of this, really. And as managers in the public trust, I think this is really disappointing. As managers, we would expect you to look for what's wrong, not dip in honey what you believe you did right. And certainly when it came to the last police auditor, he was fired. There's a breach of public trust, managers, over this issue. So it seems like you should have been able to come to the table with a good refresher, a perspective, hopefully a basis of fact, so that the public can determine how to guide you forward to be sure that there's an appropriate oversight. You have to keep in mind that most of the evidence shows that the police department and some of the people participating in this forum today as elected officials and also as city employees breached the public trust and created injustice. And that needs to be remedied. Facts need to be determined. People need to feel safe, not only in the moment, but overall in the sense of justice and fairness in their community. The last point I need to make is obviously with the last auditor, the intersection or the juxtaposition of the role that the unions play in determining the fate of public employees, as well as engagement of the political process, needs to be more transparent. It seems to be, and again, employees need to be protected, people need to be protected. Our public service employees are also members of our community. But when you have structures that wear against justice for everybody, we have a defect that managers must attend to.
Thank you. The next public comment will be from Carla. Carla, I've enabled your speaking permissions. Please unmute your microphone.
It's unmuted.
Terrific. Carla, do you see the timer on your screen?
I do.
Great. Please identify yourself for public record if you so choose, and your time begins now.
Sure. My name is Carla Viking. I'm a Santa Rosa resident. So I guess I'm even more confused after the city manager's description of why we don't currently have an auditor than I was before. So I guess in a way, this is a wonderful opportunity to sort of change that position to really align with what everyone's asking for. So I guess it doesn't matter too much what happened in the past. My biggest request would be for us to really make sure that that new position has lots of transparency and actual teeth to make change. And it sounds like maybe a little bit of autonomy. So again, I'm no expert, but those would be my my immediate thoughts: more community involvement, more transparency, and really being able to act based on what they see. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Carla. The next public comment. There are no additional hands raised. The next public comment will be from Keith. Keith, I've enabled your speaking permissions. Please unmute your microphone.
Already? I can't believe it.
All right, Keith, do you see the timer on your screen?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, please identify yourself for public record if you choose, and your time begins now.
My name is Keith Reinhardt. I am a former member of the ILARO CAC. I was a member briefly this year. I want to share from my personal experience and my knowledge of how much money has been spent on the office of the sheriff's auditor. I just don't think an auditor is the way to go. I understand the city attorney and Councilmember Sawyer being concerned about the legal ramifications of what the limits are, what we can do. However, we seem to be in a situation where we do need to look at those existing laws and regulations that have already been passed to super protect law enforcement officers and to not allow transparency to the public to whom they serve. So I just wanted to share with you that, again, my recommendation would be a citizens oversight committee with some powers. However, we have to go through the processes of changing laws or rewriting MOUs between the management and the rank and file of the police department, the fire department, the whole bit. I just think it's very important to look at Sonoma County's ILARO and Community Action Committee and realize that it has been an entirely expensive and abject failure. And basically, a lot of good work was done by a lot of good people way before I came on board. And basically, all of that work got ignored by our present sheriff. So I just don't think that auditing reports that have already been submitted by Internal Affairs to an auditor is really going to do much other than say, well, you know what? You didn't dot an I here and you didn't cross a T there. So I'm sending this back to you. I don't even understand how the term police auditor came into our conversation in Sonoma County and Santa Rosa. So again, please consider a citizens oversight committee for what I consider the best police department in our county. And I think this will go a long way towards, again, continuing to make us proud of Santa Rosa Police Department as it continues to improve and respond to community input. And I want to thank the members for allowing me to comment on this today. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no additional hands raised, I'm going to move on to the voice message public comments on item 4.3, which there were none. Additionally, there were no email public comments on 4.3 police auditor. And that concludes public comment for item 4.3.
All right, thank you for that. Bring it back to the subcommittee. Any final questions or comments from you, Mr. Sawyer? Seeing none. Ms. Vice Mayor, any comments?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that as we do go forward in shaping this, that we make sure that however we envision it, that the auditor is able to, in their capacity, help move us towards our goals and not just somebody that we hire in order to say that we hired someone and did something. And so I want to make sure that we're really intentional in giving teeth to this position, and that and have some way of offering this person political cover and having some of the responsibility, for example, in making their decisions. If their decisions are unfavorable to an officer or politically difficult, that the council would have their back in some way, or the council would ultimately arbitrate something, or a citizens oversight board would ultimately arbitrate, you know, when it comes down to something more serious. I think that, you know, as one commenter said, we should have already understood this, but I think that having a conversation about what worked and what didn't, both with our own auditor and with ILARO, is in front of the public in modern times is incredibly important to informing how we go forward in a way that achieves efficacy for our community. Thank you.
And my final comments are consistent with before the comments. You know, appreciate the process that we're at. Again, it would have been nice to have an auditor in place now, but there's circumstances beyond your control, including the retirement of chief of police and the interest in this current chief do listening sessions. I think it will be interesting. Let's hear what more members of our community like and then start fashioning that based on that input. So, Mr. City Manager, did you get the information you needed from the subcommittee?
I did.
All right, thank you very much. All right, we'll move on to item 4.4, the after action report. Mr. City Manager.
So this is just to provide council with an update. We have done a solicitation for an after action report. That solicitation is going to be reviewed next week. Council member Dowd is participating, as he was the council member that was on the schedule to participate in solicitations. I want to make it clear that the after action report, while this was centered in the Police Department Operations Center, it will be a citywide look at an after action report. I think there's also important clarification that was provided yesterday, that there's an investigation going on, and that is work between the city attorney's office and the city manager's office, and that was charged to us through the council yesterday. That is a separate conversation than an after action. After actions look at best practice protocols. It will look at the 7 days that were part of the emergency in response to the protest. So it'll look at that, but it is not the investigation. I don't want to confuse it with the investigation that was authorized by council yesterday. So we've gone through after actions in the past. We've learned a lot about our operations and how we can do better. And that will be brought to this committee, that after action report, and eventually brought to the full council for review. So that is just to provide you an update. That solicitation has taken place. We are now going to be reviewing proposals, and one of your colleagues is involved in that proposal review.
Okay, thank you for that. And just for clarification, the investigation that we discussed last night, that will be totally separate, done by separate people from this after action report.
Correct.
Great, great to see all the nodding heads. All right, subcommittee members, Mr. Sawyer, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions, Mayor, and thank you very much. You know, I was kind of curious as to how we were going to begin this process, and I think that we began it well. And we have a long road ahead of us, and I am looking forward to the difficult questions that will be before us, and how the community will help inform our responses. So thank you for this, and I appreciate the input and the sensitivities of Vice Mayor Fleming. I think we have a good group in this endeavor, and but it's just going to get better with the more input that we get, both from the council and staff and of course the community at large, because they will help us dig deeper and go into those areas that are uncomfortable and painful and necessary.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Fleming, do you have any comments you'd like to make?
Just echo what Councilmember Sawyer said. Thank you.
And the only question I have, Mr. City Manager, on the scope of service, do we know yet who the after action report, what either electeds or individuals he or she will be interviewing to obtain information?
There will be an interview, as we did in the past. There'll be an interview with council members as part of the process.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's move to public comment procedures for item 4.4. Madam City Clerk or Madam Host, would you facilitate that process?
Yes. Thank you, Mayor. Now we are taking public comments on item 4.4, after action report. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you are dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. All right, the first public comment will be from Eric. Eric, I've enabled your speaking permissions. Please unmute your microphone.
I have.
Terrific. Do you see a timer on your screen?
Yes, I do.
Great. Please identify yourself for public record if you so choose, and your time begins now.
Thank you very much. Eric Frazier from Santa Rosa. I appreciate the opportunity to address you once again. This is just the beginning. What does that mean? Seriously, don't you realize that you guys stepped in it, that you're in the middle of something, that you're part of a process, an accumulation, a response? It does a disservice to the urgency of the issue to think that you're always beginning once again to study something that certainly you had years of understanding about, that you could see developing. When it comes to the after action report, I want to be sure that within the scope, there's a complete treatment of what led up to the curfew. And when it came to the curfew itself, what the timeline, the process, the decision-making regarding the curfew. The belief is that the three white guys on the panel made a decision with the chief of police to create a show of force, to put at jeopardy the lives and liberties of many young people in our community expressing peacefully their point of view. It was a serious breach of the public trust. And I hope in whatever reports are created, we get to the crux of the matter, because we cannot have these types of actions dictated by a couple people wanting to play cop and feeling that the way to build power is to show force. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd see no additional hands raised, Mayor. I'm going to move on to the voice message public comments received on 4.4, which there were none. Likewise, there were no email public comments on item 4.4.
Great, thank you so much for that. Bring it back to the subcommittee. Any additional comments for the city manager on our after action report? Seeing none, and Mr. City Manager, did you get what you needed from the three of us?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Next item, 4.5, future agenda items. So I know we talked earlier, if I could just start the discussion, a specific thing, in exploration of the CAHOOTS program in Eugene, Oregon is something that we've heard before, and I'm very interested in learning more about that program. So with that as a start off, Mr. Sawyer, did you have some items that you wanted to add or include?
Yes, if they have not already been scribed, I would like to hear more about the nature of those of our calls. You know, it's probably going to take a fair amount of staff time. Not sure how far back to go, but to get to capture a good representation of the nature of our calls and who the callers are. Really look forward to hearing that information, because I think it will seriously help inform some of the recommendations that we may or that we will come up with. And that's it as far as I can think of for future agenda items, other than perhaps, which is probably further down the road, a look at what the Academy is how the academy is training in the that one item in the 7 can't wait, the reporting item, the reporting on other officers. And I don't have it in front of me.
So pretty much the police use of force curriculum?
No, the reporting on officers officers using more force than other officers feel is necessary, abusing that use of force, and how that is trained in the academy here in Santa Rosa. We can't, I mean, there are academies all across the country, so I'm not really interested in those, but how the JC's academy handles that particular issue.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Sawyer?
That's it for now.
And just as an FYI, I plan on keeping this topic, may not be 4.5, but future agenda items will be a standing item on this agenda. So as we evolve, we can add. It's not one and done. Ms. Fleming, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you. So I have a long laundry list of things, and I'm going to try to just give a few now. And you said it's something that we can return to so that we don't overwhelm, because one of the things that I think it might happen is that we're going to need to prioritize things. There'll be things that are urgent for us to do now, things that take some staff time to get done in the future, and things that would be imprudent to start doing right now until we get robust community engagement on specific topics. And I don't mean that we haven't heard from the public, but I mean that we will need to do due diligence to drill down on items that are of particular importance. But going forward, the conversation that I mentioned earlier about what is the meaning of being safe in public. And somebody, caught on right away. I think it might have been Councilmember Sawyer, that I don't necessarily feel safe walking down an alley. It doesn't mean that I'm afraid of a police officer, but it might just be that it's dark out. And so, making sure that we encompass this, or that we have a broad conversation about keeping all of our residents and visitors safe. The next is considering a citizen oversight or review board as something that could work with a police officer, and if that's something that the community has any interest in. And then I would like to hear a presentation from staff. I know you guys love giving us presentations, but I'd love to hear a presentation on Measure O, specifically as it pertains to the flexibility and the restrictions that this group and the council has in terms of implementing policies that may impact funding of the police department. And what kinds of leeway we might have without having to overcome the 6/7 vote on Measure O, and exploring that. And then I'd like to hear about the Police Bill of Rights and other legislation that Chief Navarro at the state level that he referred to, so that both for us and for the public, we have some clarity on where we stand and how we've come to this place where officers have a very high level of protection from transparency, and where they don't, so that we can just get a very clear picture, an unbiased picture of where we are with transparency. And then finally, hiring practices. I think it'd be helpful to hear what the details are of our hiring practices and what we could do to make our hiring practices even tighter, and specifically exploring whether or not the prospective auditor might have access to the previous records of potential officers to SRPD, and might be able to make recommendations to the chief if the auditor were to find that the officer is coming to us with baggage that the SRPD may not be in the benefit of our community at large. Those are just a few of the things. I'll leave it at that for the sake of not causing too much overwhelm and throwing all the spaghetti. I'll save some of the spaghetti for dinner. How about that?
Tomorrow's
and thank you for a helpful, good, leading us through a helpful and productive meeting to the mayor and the city manager.
So the only, I don't want to add to the list, just add more specifics. When I first brought up the calls for service at our, I think that was a budget hearing, I am interested, that breakdown in hearing from, the community and quite frankly, the police department, what other options of responding versus having a cop to respond to it. I know we've talked about mental health issues. We've talked about some homeless issues. Because I think once we hear that presentation, this subcommittee may be able to start the works, say on, I'm just pulling these numbers out. If we had 100,000 calls for service, 20,000 were for those experiencing homelessness. If we think that can be handled by someone other than police, let's dive in. Okay, what would that look like? And what would the resources needed to be to effectively and efficiently respond to that? So I think the first part is what Councilmember Sawyer said, calls for service. But then I think that'll be an ongoing, let's drill down deeper about how do we actually change our response to some of those issues. And then for Mike, well, let me go back. Mr. Sawyer, do you have your hand up?
Yes. Thank you. It's probably on the vice mayor's list and it was captured, I'm sure already, but the language of the policy, and it's probably a simple exercise, but I would like to get a copy of the policy and look at the language and see where we can tighten that up. That may be, I'm not sure how far down the road we want to deal with that, but we mentioned it earlier, and I want to make sure that does get on the list, but in deference to having too long a list, as long as it's kind of in the parking lot, I'm okay with that, but we definitely need to review that policy language.
And the way I was envisioning this, so since this is our very first meeting, we will probably be adding another topic for old business. And so the 8 can't wait police auditor after action report, those would be the items. Okay, are there any updates to that? My hope would be that whatever actions the chief or the city manager has made on any of those, at our next meeting, we would get an update on that. Does that serve the interest that you were just discussing?
It does.
Okay. And then go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Real quickly to that point, would it be too onerous for us to have some sort of public facing tracking, just a simple landing page that said what we did and what we've achieved so that people could see the process? And if it's a lot, I understand that, but I think it might be helpful for people to see.
I think it's, to your point, Vice Mayor, I think that's going to be incredibly important part of this. And I think going back to the question of August 4th, I think I'm going to need some assistance. I think it can be done, but I think the work needs to be done, and we need to prioritize this work across the city. And including your hiring practice question, I think has a wider implication on how we get people into these jobs professionally, and how we test, how we onboard, how we provide access. There's a wider conversation, and I think there's an urgency here that needs to be addressed. I'm hoping that the three of you will bring it up in the August 4th, because I think that baseline, working on how far we're making progress here, is going to be incredibly important.
Good. Okay. And then, well, why don't we leave it at that? Well, I'll just share because I do want to hear public comment on these items. But as far as the frequency of the meetings, I did have a meeting with staff, because it is somewhat, especially at our city clerk's office, they do a phenomenal job. But in this Zoom environment with the 3 different methodologies of receiving input, it's labor intensive. So if the 2 of you would allow me the opportunity to work with the city manager and staff about the frequency, so that we do have the resources available, because they do have other jobs. And my hope would be, if we do bring this up on August 4th, we change the priorities, that might allow additional staff time if this does, some of these discussions do make it into our top tier priorities. Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
To your point about scheduling, there is, we had talked about the SRO position, and I did, as the person recommended to liaise with the city schools, I did speak with President Fong today about their meetings, and they put their meetings on our Tuesday evenings and before it came to my attention that we would likely hold these meetings on the Tuesdays that we don't have council. I had said, well, it might be possible for me to attend those meetings. So I just want to put that on your radar, and hopefully we can work with her and find a way for us to have a meaningful dialogue with them. But just to add to your fun scheduling, activities in your spare time.
And just to confirm, right now, those SRO discussions are scheduled from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m.
Yeah, so my rec off the top of my head, which is not a very sharp top at this hour, but is July 7, 14, 21, 28, and then 2 Tuesdays in August. I want to say maybe 4 and 11. So as you can see, unlikely that we would be able to participate, or any of us would for that matter, in many of those meetings.
Because I think their recommendation is going to the board like August 24th. So we'll factor that into the consideration. Mr. Sarge, do you have any comments about frequency or anything else?
No, I'll leave that up to you. You know, there's a lot going on, and it is scheduling is one of the more difficult tasks that we are that we deal with, and I'm very sensitive to the pressure on staff.
Okay, thank you. All right, Madam City Clerk, could you facilitate the public comment on item 4.5?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Now's the time on the agenda where we are hearing public comment on item 4.5 or future agenda items. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise your hand in Zoom. If you are participating via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. First public comment will be from Eric, followed by Keith. Eric, I've enabled your speaking permissions. Can you please unmute your microphone and confirm you can see the timer on your screen?
Thank you, I have.
Please identify yourself for public record if you choose, and your time begins now.
This is Eric Frazier from Santa Rosa. Thanks once again for the opportunity to address the issues at hand. And also I appreciate the opportunity to sort of close out the meeting too. I know Keith follows me, and certainly what he has to say is very important. It was for me to hear. One thing I'd like to have added to future agenda items is an understanding of how healing happens. What public processes do we have in place to help our citizens that have been or see themselves as victims of injustice? How do they get redressed in their complaints? What are the reparations, the restorations? If you're acting virtually or with virtue as a public officer, justice is your top concern. That's why facts matter. And you all know that certainly when we've picked up and examined facts that have been offered by the city in different scenarios, without the ability to check those facts, we would have been misled. And we also see how the staging of facts helps justify decisions that are being made by our elected officials without the benefit of truth and really facts, verifiable facts. So an additional agenda item would be guidance on how citizens outside of a citizen oversight committee, but citizens just because they're citizens and you're our government, have access to facts and the mechanisms for checking those facts. And that will put us on the road to justice. Lord knows your management skills probably won't. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next public comment will be from Keith, followed by Charlotte. Keith, I've enabled your speaking permissions. Please unmute your microphone.
Done.
Great. Can you confirm you see a timer on your screen?
I do.
Wonderful. Please identify yourself for public record if you so choose, and your time begins now.
Hi, my name is Keith Reinhardt. I have been a resident of Sonoma County since 1961. And much of those years were spent within the city of Santa Rosa. I want to acknowledge Mr. Fraser for his comments, and I feel that they were incredibly constructive. We may not agree on everything. And I just want to say I thought this was a very constructive meeting, that we were all able to talk about these issues and considering where the community would like to go. And I want to thank the Public Safety Committee for, again, considering the community in their inputs. And I stand ready. And like I always say, you know, you want to look to a police department in Sonoma County that is the best that we have and that we want to make even better. It's the Santa Rosa Police Department. And the actions that they've taken, like promoting Tom Schwedhelm, a local cop, to lead the force, and Hank Schroeder, and now Rainer Navarro, local guys that know our community. I have a lot of faith in this department, and I'm pleased with the results of this meeting. And I just want to say, as I'm sure Eric Fraser as well, we stand ready to assist you in any way we can in making policing our community something that we can all be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. The next public comment will be from Charlotte, followed by Carla. Charlotte, I've enabled your speaking permissions. Please unmute your microphone and confirm you can see the timer on your screen.
I can see it.
Thank you. Please identify yourself for public record if you choose, and your time begins now.
Hello, my name is Charlotte. I'm a member of the community. This may be an issue of the subcommittee being new, but I think I speak for more than just myself in saying that it would be beneficial for documents related to agenda items to be available earlier than day of. Chief Navarro's presentation was uploaded this morning, and so anybody who wanted to have a comment on that agenda item did not have access to that document until today. This is an accessibility issue, both in terms of people who are unable to join the meeting live, and also people who are unable to develop responses in the moment for one reason or another. You've said multiple times today and also in past meetings that you want to receive as much public comment as is possible on these reform meetings. A component of making that happen is providing enough details soon enough to determine what's being spoken on in advance in order to achieve the level of involvement you're looking for. That's all. I yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you. The next public comment will be from Carla, followed by Gloria. Carla, I've enabled your speaking permissions. Please unmute your microphone and confirm that. Thank you, and confirm that you can see the timer on your screen.
I can see it.
Wonderful. Please identify yourself for public record, and your time begins now.
Sure. My name is Carla Wyking. I'm a Santa Rosa resident. I just wanted to echo Vice Mayor Fleming's request for a future item to be looking at Measure O and what we need to do to work around that measure. It seems to me like a lot of the issues and a lot of the sentiment that I'm hearing in these other public forums is that we're spending a whole lot on the police department. And I think that maybe there's some wiggle room there so that we can have a broader public safety picture that involves more than just oversight in the current police department. So I appreciate that she asked for that, and I would also like to see that as a future item. Thanks.
Thank you, Carla. The next public comment will be from Gloria. Gloria, I've enabled your speaking permissions. Can you please unmute your microphone and confirm you can see the timer on your screen?
Yes, I'm unmuted and I can see the timer. Thank you.
Thank you. Please identify yourself for public record if you so choose, and your time begins now.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Gloria and I am a resident of Santa Rosa, California. I actually just moved back here after being away at school for 4 years. So when I saw that this meeting was happening today, I felt like it was my duty to come and listen and give my opinion. I wanted to go back to what Charlotte said and say that I think presentations being uploaded earlier and having community members be more aware via efforts of social media and whatever else we can do to let citizens know what is going on and where. That's something that I felt was difficult when logging on and finding information about the police auditor and 8 Can't Wait, because I have been out of Santa Rosa for a few years. So I wanted to say that I agree with some of the things that were said, but I don't think that enough community input has been said, and that is in part due to the lack of openness and promotion of these events. 2 things I would like to say are that when we talk about the police auditor, I would like to have more information about that and what that entails and what happened with the last ones. I came on expecting to hear details about how this went in the past and was disappointed when members of the council were not able to speak on what was done well and unwell years ago. Being a young person and a person of color in Santa Rosa, I don't feel safer by police officers. Andy Lopez would have been my age if he was alive today, and that is partially why I feel this way, as well as the fact that it took multiple days to arrest the young man who ran into a group of protesters in Santa Rosa when there was video of it. I just don't think that more money in the police is what is going to help us right now, because we see collusion across the world or across America when it comes to police officers. So I appreciate you being open and listening, and I hope in the future we can be more transparent and hear more public opinions. And I think we do that by way of advertising and letting community members know exactly what is happening and what steps we are taking to make it better. I yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you. The next public comment will be from Manny. Manny, I've enabled your speaking permissions. Please unmute your microphone and confirm you can see the timer on your screen.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please identify yourself for public record if you choose, and the time begins now.
Hey, Ramon again. I want to echo the previous speaker's point of making this a little more accessible to people. It was basically just 3 of us now, and I'll do my best to bring more public into this dialogue, but it's pretty disheartening. And then, yeah, I think it might not be a public safety issue in your eyes, but Measure O is so intertwined with the message that you've been given over and over from the public. And it was almost like swept under the rug when the budget was passed. Measure O, we brought the funding down to the Measure O baseline, but there wasn't a vote on it, which was very possible. So maybe just like have it agendized so you can explain what your attachment to it is. So we have a better understanding, and it doesn't feel like you are so deaf to, what hundreds of people were saying to you. So yeah, thanks for your time.
Mayor, there were no additional hands raised. Additionally, there were no email public comments or voice message public comments on item 4.5. And that concludes public comment.
Okay, thank you for that. If I can just add, I want to take responsibility for some of the materials at the late date, because I heard many members of the community have the interest of let's get this thing rolling, what's taken so long. So when I had the conversation with staff, as Mr. Sawyer had also mentioned, staff is at capacity right now. So I know I pushed it, let's have this early. So I apologize that, we had the meeting early, but that means a lot of people are wearing a variety of different hats to get the material out as soon as possible. So my hope is now that we've had our first and we kind of are getting our sea legs for the agenda and the timing of this, when I work with the city manager and city clerk's office, I think we'll be able to provide the materials in a more expeditious manner. So Ms. Fleming and Mr. Sawyer, any final comments? See, reading your lips, Mr. Sawyer. With that, nothing else to discuss. I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for your attendance and participation.